What's up, everybody? I'm John Middlekauff. You know what I need you to do. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. We got content for days reacting to every NFL game all the time, every single day. Subscribe, like the videos. Let's go.
What is going on, everybody? How are we doing? It's the middle of the week, Wednesday, a little before lunchtime. Well, depending where you are, it might be lunchtime, could be dinner time, could be breakfast. Especially in New Orleans, if you had a late night, depending on when you're getting up. I told myself when I came here I was going to be very tame, and I was last night. Probably 3 or 4 Tito sodas with some buddies from the Chiefs and the Eagles. So I think we all agree we're just kind of ready to get this game going. I mean, there's a lot of you can only ask Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes and Lane Johnson and Sirianni and Fangio so many questions. But this is part of the buildup when it comes to the Super Bowl. There's people everywhere. I mean, on my flight, Debo Samuel was on it. I saw Steve Smith Sr. this morning getting some eggs. So you just got football people everywhere. You got the festivities. This is, I mean, a party town, which someone had mentioned because I walked last night. My toiletry bag, I forgot there wasn't that much stuff in it, but toothbrushes, razors, that BS. I'd forgotten my taxi, and I was so impatient. The Uber line was so long, so I just hopped in a taxi, and I had to go to CVS, and I was walking back, and there's cops everywhere, and I looked at them, I'm like, this place looks pretty clean. I'm like, New Orleans is normally this clean. He's like, oh, we shipped all the homeless. I mean, millions of dollars shipped them. I'm like, God, they clear these places out when the Super Bowl comes. It's crazy the power of the NFL. The same thing happened to LA a couple years ago. I remember driving to the volume party, and the Uber driver's like, "Oh, they cleaned this place up." So, New Orleans, it's clean, it's vibrant, it's party town, booze town. I mean, this is a boozing town. Good food. What I was told was the best cheeseburger in New Orleans. Probably get some gumbo tonight. Try to be healthy, but it's difficult here. Other than that, I think today we'll do a big mailbag. So at John Middlekauff is the mailbag, and I'm just gonna bang out a bunch of questions live from my hotel room here. Uh, so other than that, before we dive into some football, though, my friends, my partners, and the official ticketing app of this podcast, do you want to go to a game? Do you want to go to an event? NCAA tournament, spring training, a concert, a comedy show, anything you want to go to, they have you covered. And here's the thing. It doesn't get any easier to download the app, to use the app, the sight lines, the price points. I'm going to Waste Management on Friday. This is a big week for me. I mean, I'm not exactly some socialite, and there's a lot going on. Uh, Flying to New Orleans, coming right back, going to Waste Management, and it's because of these guys at Game Time, right? Well, I'm not necessarily going to the game here, but Waste Management on Friday. So Game Time. Here's the thing: take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code JOHN for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code JOHN for $20 off. Download the Game Time app. Lowest tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. Okay, well, before we dive into the mailbag, as I sit here in the Marriott, I'm a loyal, there's no free ads here, but I've been a Marriott guy since I traveled in scouting. And when you do that, you have just hundreds of nights, so you accumulate so many points. Well, I've just kept the credit card and used it for the last, decade plus, and I don't travel that much. So when I do, I have so many points that I can basically pick any hotel and for most major cities. And I'm JW right downtown, and it's like I just can't recommend. I'm a big loyal Marriott guy. They're just consistent, good hotels. The points is just fantastic. I mean, the location here is awesome. I got the Chiefs staying right across the street from me, the Eagles right down the street from me. I had a bunch of cocktails with some buddies on both staffs last night, and it's just it's cool to watch how good those two teams are. I mean, and I told Colin this, when I got hired in Philadelphia, I didn't know Howie Roseman from the Man on the Moon, right? I'm a California guy, I've been at Fresno State. I didn't know anything. I wasn't an Eagles fan. I was a 49er guy. And you meet Howie and you start working for him and you realize this guy is just a ambitious go-getter. And it was clear once you spend time around him, it was going to be very difficult for him not to be successful. He's just too smart. He works too hard. He's just too aggressive. And obviously, by the time I got there, Andy was very, very successful. And once he's gone to Kansas City, he's become an all-time legend. But, one topic of conversation that came up last night, Andy's a Hall of Famer, right? Andy, even if disappeared tomorrow and didn't coach this game, lock, first ballot Hall of Famer. Some of the players on both teams from, Patrick Mahomes to Kelsey to Chris Jones to Lane Johnson. You got some other guys on the Eagles that are building up a Hall of Fame career. Obviously, Kelsey just retired. He's a Hall of Famer. But when you look at the personnel people, Brett Veach has been the general manager of a team that has 3 Super Bowls. And Andy has spoken openly and aggressively, like he picks the players. And trust me, as someone who knows people, like this is not like the Andy Reid when I was in Philadelphia was also the highest guy in the totem pole. And that's obviously once he left, Howie's taken over that role. But when he went to Kansas City, from John Dorsey to now Brett Veach, like he is not the general manager. So this team is built by Veach and the personnel department. I don't see whether you win or lose this game on Sunday, how Brett Veach isn't a Hall of Fame general manager. Obviously, if he wins this game on Sunday and would have be the GM of a team that won 3 straight and also won another title, I mean, and think about some of the teams he's beaten. He's beaten 2 excellent 49er teams and 2 excellent Eagles teams. So it's like, is he a first ballot Hall of Famer as a general manager? Now, the thing is, this is not like Bill Polian or some super old guy. I mean, Veach is, I don't know how, was he 46, 48? I mean, he's not that old. So he's going to be a GM in theory for a long, long time. I mean, I would imagine he will be the GM of the Kansas City Chiefs whenever Andy Reid does finally retire. And I also think, Howie Roseman's probably on the fringe. We've seen a lot of GMs over the years win a Super Bowl. But if you win 2 Super Bowls as a general manager, when it's 100% clear, you're not just in charge of picking the players, you're in charge of kind of the whole organization. And the first Super Bowl with a backup quarterback, you beat Tom Brady, and then you beat Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid. I think Howie Roseman would be a lock Hall of Famer. So, I mean, when you talk about big picture stuff with this game, when it comes to obviously, the coaches and the players, but the personnel people have a very, very good chance of becoming pretty legendary. And that to me is what's cool about this game. And just see these guys. I mean, I got a buddy on the Chiefs staff who was with the Eagles in Foles' year, so he won a Super Bowl, transitioned to the Chiefs a year later. And if he wins tomorrow, this will be his 5th ring. I mean, it's like, I was like, how many rings? That's insane. Think how many people that work in pro sports their whole career that maybe get to a finals or get to a World Series or get to a Super Bowl, let alone win one. But to win 3, 4, 5 rings, I mean, it's fucking insane. I mean, all these guys. I mean, if the Eagles win, I got multiple buddies on the staff that would be their 2nd ring, their 3rd Super Bowl appearance. Some of them were there back in the day when they went in to play the Patriots in the early mid 2000s. So you're talking about teams that just win a lot of success, a lot of big playoff bonuses. So it's very cool to watch. And one topic of conversation is that Kellen Moore is I mean, he's just going to be the head coach of the Saints, which I appreciate ambitious people and aggressive people. I think that's a pretty bold move. I mean, to take that, I think it's a terrible job, but yeah, I mean, it's hard to become a head coach. Most people don't turn down head coaching jobs, and we've seen over the years people that do sometimes get lost in the shuffle. I mean, everyone's making fun of Brian Schottenheimer. 15 years ago, he was turning down jobs, turning down head coaching jobs. And then he becomes the head coach of the Cowboys, like 51 years old, and everyone starts making fun of him. So, your star can rise just as fast as it can blow up and dim. So I get it. I mean, it's just part of the business. But yeah, other than that, I mean, this is a good Super Bowl place. One underrated part before we dive into the mailbag is the South is just kind of humid. That's one thing I didn't quite expect when I came here. I knew it was going to be 75 degrees, but I just expected like 75 degrees and just kind of nice. That thick air. It's not like sweating humid, but you could tell it's like 5, 10 degrees away from being like, damn, this would be pretty brutal. I guess this is part, the water's right. I guess I can see the water from right here, but let's dive into the mailbag. Question for the bag. This is from Nick. How much do players, coaches, and executives think about their franchise history? For example, I'm a Vikings fan. Say they made the Super Bowl. Obviously, during the week, the fans would be talking about how we've never won a Super Bowl before. But would the players, coaches think about that at all? Or do you ever look back at their successful teams in the past for a guide on how to build their team? Thanks, appreciate. I would say that when you're part of a franchise that's never won a Super Bowl, let's use the Eagles as an example. When they were playing in that Tom Brady, Nick Foles Super Bowl, I think it's a pretty big deal when you're a franchise that has never won one. That is a major topic of conversation when for those 2 weeks. Honestly, for your playoff run, right? Starting once you enter the playoffs, like, is this going to be the year? For the Bills, the Vikings, some of those type teams, it's like it's those teams. I mean, the Bills and the Vikings. When's the last time the Vikings been to the Super Bowl? Was that the 70s? Obviously, the Bills haven't been back since the early 90s. But if they ever make it back, the number one conversation will be, how do we win the Super Bowl for the first time ever? Because I know that was the conversation not that long ago with the Philadelphia Eagles, right? And I think when you have a franchise, let's use the 49ers as an example. When they make it, it's like, can Kyle Shanahan finally win a Super Bowl? 49ers already have a bunch. So it's even the Eagles now back in it. Like, they already got the monkey up their back. So it's like, can they take down the Chiefs? It's not about the franchise. So I think it's a driving conversation and a huge part of the story when it comes to the game when a team hasn't had success in the Super Bowl. I'm a Carolina Panther fan. Do you think Bryce Young will ever become a great quarterback in the NFL? Can he ever be better than CJ Stroud or Jaden Daniels? Uh, I would say that before we try to climb Mount Everest, let's just walk. Hell, maybe even a light jog. Last year was an incredible accomplishment. It really was. Because early on in the season, it could not have looked any worse. It looked like he might not make it to his third year. Like, he might not be on the team in year three. That was 100% on the table. That happened to Trey Lance. By the third year, the 49ers shipped him to the Cowboys. It happened. They moved on that fast. And like you guys, traded a bunch, and it was like, this is not going to work. And then Bryce Young, because Andy Dalton gets in that car accident, gets to come back and I would say resurrects his career, which is crazy to say for a guy that had played a year and a half. But that's what happened. So before he can be better than Jaden Daniels, I mean, Jaden Daniels just took, we were talking about it last night, one of the shittiest teams you will ever see. I mean, they were terrible. They were so, in terms of roster wise. I polled some people last night. They didn't think they were a top 20 roster in the NFL. Took that. I mean, what Jaden Daniels was doing blew people in the NFL away. Blew people away. CJ Stroud up and down his second year, but still, it's won some playoff games. Let's just see Bryce continue to play the way he's playing. And I think everyone associated with the Panthers and any fan of the Panthers, hell, any Alabama fan, any fan, I was a fan of Bryce Young coming out, should be very, very excited. I've always found it interesting how some NFL coaches are in incredible shape, like Dan Campbell, Sean McVay, and Dave Canales, while others seem to let themselves go. Given that they're constantly surrounded by elite athletes, strength coaches, and top-tier health professionals, you'd think that the environment would naturally influence them to prioritize nutrition and fitness. Why do you think some coaches embrace that lifestyle while others don't? Just something I've been curious about. I like this question. I would say, one, genetics play a part, right? Vic Fangio, even if he was a more healthy eater, and I would say I don't know his workout habits, but if you look at him, I'd say he's probably not in the gym 5 days a week. his genetics are dramatically different than Sean McVay or Dan Campbell's. I mean, Dan Campbell played in the NFL for like a decade. Dave Canales and Sean McVay are like look like they're on the heavy dose of the tea, which I don't blame them. But I think some people, and we all know these people, I think the older generation, guys, I would say 55, 60 plus, they're coaches in the NFL. It's just like work, 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 and you only have so much energy. So for me, I have to get a sweat, even though I'm in bad shape right now. I still work out all the time. It's more my diet because that energizes me. Some people, once they get off the routine, and this is what's crazy about coaches who can work like 18 hours a day, that they end up just not working out and how they still have energy, but they do. So I think part of it is once you prioritize it, it just becomes a routine. And that's what I think the biggest thing is with coaches, whether you're working out or not, they all have a routine. And the guys you just listed, especially I would imagine McVay and Canales, same with Dan Campbell. I mean, their workouts are more than likely coming at like 5:30 in the morning. So when you work out early in the morning, I guess you eat well. I think a large thing too is, Dan Campbell's kind of unique because of his body type, but it's just diet. I mean, the older you get, obviously working out is key, but your diet is such a key. I mean, it really is. And I do think when you're a coach, you're sitting around a lot. So if you're snacking a lot, it could add up fast.
This ain't the little itty bitty tiny bowl. This is the Super Bowl 59. Get in on the action at DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of Super Bowl 59. Scoring touchdowns is key to hosting the Vince Lombardi Trophy, and you have a shot to score big by betting on them at DraftKings Sportsbook, the number one place to bet touchdowns. Ready to place your first bet? Try betting on something simple like a player to score a TD. Go to DraftKings Sportsbook app and make your pick. New DraftKings customers can bet $5 to get $200 in bonus bets instantly. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and use the code JOHN. That's code JOHN for new customers to get $200 in bonus bets instantly when you bet just $5. Only on the DraftKings Sportsbook app. The crown is yours.
A lot of people have hit me up with different names. One that I've actually really liked that someone hit me with, I didn't write down his name, was the Outsiders. It's obviously called Three and Out. We're a little bit of a, you know, we beat to our own drum around here. I kind of like that, the Outsiders. And his logic was, this isn't a traditional like media. You didn't go to Big J school. You just kind of do your own thing. I'm like, I kind of like that. So I wrote down a couple, and that's definitely one that stuck out to me. Currently, Daniel Jeremiah has the draft for the top 6 picks going like this: the Titans, Abdul Carter; the Browns, Travis Hunter; the Giants, Cam Ward; the Patriots, Will Campbell, offensive tackle LSU; the Jags, Mason Graham, defensive tackle Michigan; and the Raiders, Shedeur Sanders. We all know who he is. Do you agree? And would it be smart for the Raiders to get a top free agent like Darnold, if available, or Flacco to help develop Shedeur? If they end up, well, here's the thing. You don't control the draft, right? So when you're the Raiders and you're at 6, Shedeur could go number 1 overall. Let's just, in a perfect world, or in a hypothetical world, say that Shedeur Sanders is the Titans' favorite player. I don't know that. I doubt he is, but let's just, for this exercise, if he goes number 1 overall and you were planning on drafting him and all of a sudden you don't have a backup plan. So it's like getting Joe Flacco, getting Sam Darnold is not necessarily to groom Shedeur Sanders. You don't know if you're going to be able to draft Shedeur Sanders, right? Unless, during the combine, you're able to orchestrate a trade, right? Before like free agency. So you already are drafting 2. But if you're not, I just think it's the way the league is set up. You have to make your decisions on free agency before the draft comes around. So last year, when they signed Sam Darnold to a $10 million contract in Minnesota, they had no idea if they could get J.J. McCarthy for sure. They didn't even know on draft night if he was going to be there. Remember that they weren't even drafting in the top 10, and it was hard for them to trade up. Now they probably had a good idea he was going to be there, but there was no guarantee at all. So I think that's always part of it in terms of why you sign a quote unquote bridge guy. It's because you don't know if you're going to be able to draft a guy unless you're drafting number one overall, right? If the Titans were to sign Joe Flacco, you could be like, well, they have a backup plan in terms of like he could be the starter, or maybe they'll just start Joe Flacco and draft Abdul Carter. I know you've discussed this before, but I'm curious where your stance is now. I feel like I'm on an island here because everyone is all over McCarthy, running it back with Darnold for one more year on a tag or cheap deal without trading JJ seems like a great option. But when I hear these bots online thinking McCarthy is a lock to be an elite player, it makes me shake my head. Side note, if you ever want to get lit up on this link, let me know. I don't know what the link is. Oh, on the links. Oh, I was like, uh, yeah, I think anytime that you assume a guy is going to be good, bad, indifferent, like you have no clue with a rookie quarterback. None. It's like, well, he had an awesome preseason game. And it's true. He looked in the preseason game, he made some sweet throws. But to think that that just translates to real games against like the Packers and the Lions is an assumption and a mindset that can get you in a lot of trouble. This was a player, Kevin O'Connell throws the ball a lot. I would say he's borderline addicted to throwing the ball, which is not a bad thing when you got Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison, but he's going to live and die not just with throwing the ball, but deep shots. Like they push the ball down the field. Like Google JJ McCarthy. I mean, that wasn't exactly how he played in college. Doesn't mean he can't play like that in the NFL, but he's got to prove he can do it. We see a lot of people in a lot of different industries. Like, yeah, this should work. Super smart, great GPA, high level guy, networks well. Then you put him in a real life situation, it doesn't go well. It's hard for young people. This is hard. Should the Bears trade for Myles Garrett? I've been seeing a lot of Bears fans not wanting to, and I'm in the minority. I think it's a no-brainer. They have 3 top 45 picks this year. They could easily outbid any playoff team because the 10 picks is much more valuable than the 20s. Ideally, you would like to be 100% positive with your quarterback moving forward, but I feel like Caleb has shown enough to where you still have a good chance he will work out. And if he doesn't, you were kind of screwed anyway. They aren't going to have a good chance to get a player on this level anytime soon. They have a first overall pick on a rookie contract. Outside of the O-line and D-line, the Bears don't have any pressing needs. They have a ton of money to address the O-line and free agency, and Myles Garrett would instantly make the Bears one of the best defenses in the league. They came up. I asked some people last night, I'm like, what do you think about Myles Garrett? Where do you think he's going to go? And everyone said, well, look at teams with rookie contracts or rookie quarterback contracts because it is a game-changing attribute to have in building a team. And when you look at their team, you go, where do they need to improve? Offensive line. But like you said, like you can draft guards and centers with other picks not being your first round pick. Now, part of having money to use, when you trade for Myles Garrett, you're paying Myles Garrett. Like when you trade multiple first rounders for Myles Garrett, you're giving him probably 130, $140 million guaranteed. So that's part of the thing. I would say I think all the teams in the NFC North, the Packers, the Lions, the we'll see what the Vikings could have a lot of money if they just go to JJ. I think all 4 teams are going to be heavily involved in Washington. And what do they have in common? Obviously JJ McCarthy, Caleb Williams, Jaden Daniels, rookie quarterbacks. Another question about the Bears trading for him. I'm telling you, it's one of those things that's like, if they do officially put him on the market, I know he asked for a trade. They claimed he's not. They're going to have conversations. And I would guess, I mean, there are some teams like the Chiefs that they would trade for him in a heartbeat, but they just financially can't. I mean, it's just not, it's not a possibility, right? With the financial constraints. But I would say any team that even has a glimmer of hope in terms of being able to fit it into their cap and has the draft picks have already called the Browns. What would it cost? I know you said you're not going to trade him, but if you did, what would it cost? If you did, what would a package look like? And if you're interested, let us know. We would like to talk to his agent about, creating an extension for when we do trade for him. Big Broncos fan. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on the Broncos as a threat to the Chiefs in the playoffs going forward. After watching us play them this year, I can't help but think that we might have their number. I was truly hoping that we got to face them in the playoffs this year. In Nick's first game against Mahomes, he arguably outplayed him and a blocked field goal away from winning the game. If we get him a few more offensive weapons and he takes some steps forward, I feel extremely confident in the Broncos if we were to face Kansas City in the playoffs. I think there's a decent chance we are their biggest threat in the AFC. Your thoughts? Well, as I sit here in New Orleans for the Super Bowl, the Chiefs are getting ready to strap it up on Sunday for not their first, not their second, not their third, not their fourth, their fifth Super Bowl in 6 years. So I have a hard time. I know you played them tight in a random regular season game, and you got a good defense, you got a good head coach. I saw Sean Payton was here hanging out with Gruden. It used to be his town for a long period of time. I have a hard time going, the Broncos are going to be their biggest contender. Again, it doesn't mean you can't play them well moving forward, but part of being a Super Bowl contender isn't just like, oh, yeah, we match up well against the Chiefs. Like, you just got curb stomped by the Bills. You think you match up with the Bills and the Ravens? I mean, I have a let's just try to go back to back double digit win seasons. That'd be a big accomplishment, getting back to the playoffs. I have a hard time saying that the Broncos with Bo Nix are going to be the Chiefs' biggest uh, foe in the AFC, especially when, the Bills have gone toe to toe with them several times, and the Ravens did lose a game 17-10. The Chiefs play just in a lot of tight games. So I'm not trying to, you know, take a leak on your parade here, but I would pump the brakes a little bit. Another Broncos fan, lifelong Broncos fan. I gotta say this was a much needed as far as finally taking a step in the right direction. With that being said, what would you say is the next step for the Broncos to help Bo Nix for a sophomore season? I think both AFC West teams to take the next step. Defensively, they're going to be good, right? The Chargers probably got a little more to figure out on defense. Both of them to me, get a legit bell cow running back. You don't need Saquon Barkley. You don't need Christian McCaffrey in his prime. But can you just get a guy like, yeah, we feel just good about this guy being our starter? This guy actually is a high-end starter. When the Raiders drafted Josh Jacobs, I think they took him in the mid-20s. And I think there are going to be a ton of guys, and this is an excellent running back class, that can you get a guy, I don't know, in the second or third round who's just your starting running back for the next half decade and just is a threat to go for 13, 14, 1,500 yards, and a guy that you can ride in big games, in cold weather games, and just can have 20 to 25 carries throughout the majority of the season? I think that is the number one key, or one of the biggest keys, for the Chargers and the Broncos. Just to get a guy, it's like, we got a sweet running back. I heard you say the Mount Rushmore of NFL coaches, but I rarely hear anyone speak of Joe Gibbs in the same company of Bill Walsh, Andy Reid, and Bill Belichick. Gibbs won 3 Super Bowls in a 10-season time frame and won with 3 different non-Hall of Fame quarterbacks. Then, against all odds, hopped over to NASCAR, where he has won 5 championships as a car owner. In my opinion, he's one of the greatest sports leaders of all time, but I rarely hear his name mentioned. I was wondering if you ever had an opinion as to why. Was it because he was pretty non-conventional, of a quiet temperament, or didn't yell at his players? Would love to hear your thoughts. P.S. You should call him the middlemen. I like outsiders a lot more than middlemen. Um, that's a good question about Joe Gibbs. I think there's something about yelling and being an aggressive, confrontational human back in like the 70s and 80s. Like, think of the most famous coaches in the 80s, right? Walsh, but Walsh was like the offensive genius. And then it was a bunch of Parcells, screamer, Ditka, Buddy Ryan, screamers. Uh, the Raiders won, but his coaches didn't get credit. Al Davis did. I don't know. That's a great question because you're right. When it comes to like sporting lives, he's had an elite sporting life. Three Super Bowls. I do wonder if like the stink of Dan Snyder took away from everything they accomplished in the 80s. Because when you think about like some other franchises that started winning again or won in the 2000s or 2010s, it brings back up to light what happened back in the day. Like the Giants winning their two Super Bowls, it kind of brings back to light, Parcells and Belichick in the 80s with Lawrence Taylor. I'm trying to think of another example. I think anytime that you win, it just puts your franchise on a higher pedestal. And the coaches who were behind winning previously kind of get mentioned and talked about. And for multiple decades, the Washington Commanders were so bad. And you start going generations of people. Like, I don't remember Joe Gibbs as a coach at all. So it's like I'm a good example of if Washington and Philadelphia flip-flopped and Washington had been the Eagles for the last 20 plus years and won a lot, I think we would talk a lot more about Joe Gibbs. Is it crazy to think Tom Brady, a Michigan man, had extra incentive to pay Chip Kelly because it would take away from Ohio State? No, because Ryan Day, Chip Kelly was the highest or one of the highest paid coordinators in college football. So whoever Ryan Day wants to fill in his role, like if he wants to steal someone from another program, he will. I just think that they looked around, they couldn't get a couple guys that they wanted. And as someone told me last night, I don't know the guy's name, but one of the people with Brady that bought in to the Raiders is super rich and is cutting massive checks for all this shit. Like that, this is not Mark Davis 3 years ago before the Brady venture capitalist acquisition of a percentage of his team would not have given Chip Kelly $6 million. I got news for you. No one else in the NFL would have done that. But Bill Simmons calls it this new owner syndrome. Well, they got this guy who's flush with cash who I think Pete Carroll probably said, we're a little desperate here. I don't have many good options. And they gave him $6 million, which is the highest paid coordinator in the NFL. That's more money than Steve Spagnuolo and Vic Fangio. Like, that's to me pretty crazy. But I don't think it had anything to do with Ohio State. I think it had more to do with they started looking around the landscape. They weren't comfortable with any of the guys they were going to hire, and they thought he was the best option, which I still think is kind of crazy to me. Someone else brought up the name, the Scouts, the Outsiders, the Scouts. I might as well just start like a clothing brand and use all these. The Crew with a K, Scouts, Outsiders. First time DMer. I live in Tucson. Crossing my fingers to see you randomly on a golf course in Scottsdale one of these days. I remember a couple years ago you saying when you first started as a scout, you got to pick up and take players to the airport. I was wondering if you could share any funny, crazy stories from those times. I would say for the most part, when you were picking up veteran players, they were relatively quiet or cool. Like if you were signing a veteran player, bring them in for a workout. If we didn't sign them, take them back. They acted. I don't remember anything out of the ordinary at all. when you would have those things, and I'm sure you see these headlines, the top 30 visits, meaning you can bring in 30 guys in the draft class to your facility. And it doesn't mean like your top 30 players. It could be guys in the second, third, fifth round, character questions, people you want to meet. And one thing, I remember a group of like three or four guys taking them back to the airport. And then I forget exactly what the conversation was, but I remember it not being great. And anytime, Howie used to call kind of a con man if you showed up to a top 30 visit in a three-piece suit. Like you should show up to the top 30 visit in normal clothes, right? Honestly, you could wear a sweatsuit of your college team, let alone just a pair of jeans and a t-shirt and a hoodie. But if you show up and you're a character red flag to the top 30 visit in a suit, that is a major red flag. It's like, bro, what are we doing here? And I remember a guy in a suit. I forget the player. There were several players. It was like from the same college team. They had a bunch of draftable players, and a couple of them were kind of question marks. And I remember them saying, like, just started talking to each other in the back because they were college teammates and thinking, like, I'm taking some mental notes and I'm going to tell these guys when I get back. We obviously didn't draft him. I don't think the guy had a long career, but I think sometimes, for these guys, you're just you're just trying to convince there's so much money in the line if you've been in trouble or if you're just a bad guy, right? And you're just not just someone that like your coach doesn't like you in college. Like you just got a lot of red flags. It doesn't mean as time goes on you won't mature in life, but you just start kind of putting on a con and you pretend to be something you're not. And then once you relax, you kind of turn. It's like a politician. I always think with politicians, like, are they actually like this? Or it's just the camera's on and the camera's off. It's like they're off. It's like 2020. The masks are on when the cameras are on, the camera's off. Boom, that thing comes off. Same thing with these guys trying to convince a team that whatever happened to them in college is not actually who they are. It was just a bad moment. And I think, sometimes they kind of drop their their focus level on who's listening. And maybe you just a younger guy driving around, a guy in their 20s, not as focused. And you just drop character, and all of a sudden you say something that you don't even realize you said, and it gets back. Are we finally going to see a Mahomes behind the back pass in the Super Bowl? I would doubt it. I mean, I think if you get a Mahomes behind the back pass, it would more than likely be be out of desperation, not because he's trying to do it behind the back pass. You can't afford, if the thing hits off his back and it's a fumble, turnovers are too big of a deal in the playoffs to risk something like that. Love the show. Listen, I do have a question. As far as the Chiefs receiving favorable calls, I'd be interested if a stat can be pulled on the Chiefs' drives in regular season and playoffs that were continued by a third down penalty and resulted in a score. I'd be interested to see where they stand compared to other teams in the NFL on that stat. I know it sounds nuanced, but it feels like it would be a huge indicator of favorable calls. I saw someone break down that like the Bills had more 15-yard penalties called throughout the season than the Chiefs. Like you said, this is the playoffs. I would guess in general, if you have a personal foul called on a drive, the percentage chance that you are going to score points goes up exponentially. Whatever your drive chart is to score a field goal plus, right? Let's just say I'm just going to pick a number. 35-40%, right, is the percentage of times that you score on a drive. So like a little under half, either a touchdown or a field goal. If you get a 15-yard penalty on a drive, so think about now the new kickoff rule, if you start at the 30 or the 35-yard line, if you get a 15-yard penalty, especially if you've already got like a first down, you're already close, like not that far away from the red zone. Like if you start at the 35 and you've gotten a first down, you're like the 48, and all of a sudden you get a first down. I mean, you're close to like the 35-yard line. You're like a first down away from being in the red zone. So 15-yard penalty, Field's only 100 yards, and you're not starting at 0. Most of the time, at minimum, you're starting. Now with the new kickoff rule, it's very rare to see someone starting at the 20. So you're probably pretty close to the 25 or the 30-yard line. So if I just give you a free 15 yards, you're pretty fucking close to midfield. That's my issue with, and I think pass interference on some of these. I do believe that pass interference should go to a 15-yard penalty, because when I get a pass interference, even if it is pass interference, if you get a free 30, 40 yards, like that just seems ridiculous to me. Will the NFL ever consider holding the Super Bowl on a Saturday? I feel like it could become an even bigger event than it already is. It's a good question. If you're not going to have the Super Bowl before a holiday, I would say a large percentage of people have to go to work on Monday morning. And I don't know about you, I do not like being hungover on a Monday morning. So if you really want to get after it and enjoy yourself, it is much easier to do on a Friday night or Saturday night, right? So if they had it on Saturday night, would less people watch? I don't think they would. Because like you said, you would build. It's not like a random Saturday. I was like, oh, the Super Bowl's on Saturday. You would know all year long. So your life would be built around that. Now, I think the pushback might be some people with, kids, events happen on Saturday that are out of your control, but it's a night game. Um, I'm not opposed to that. I do wonder if there's just the NFL is a Sunday sport. Sunday's their day. There's something with consumer habits that play on Sunday. It's always a little weird, even when in December when they start playing on Saturdays. There's got to be something to just habits of the viewer. I hear what you're saying. Uh, I would doubt that they ever do move that though. Huge Eagles fan. With Kellen Moore likely to leave for the Saints, who do you think are some of the best candidates for the OC job? Mike McCarthy? I love the show. Keep up the good work. I think it's going to be, I think all signs point to being, I think Kevin Patullo. I might be saying his name wrong, but I'm pretty sure he is currently, he's the pass game coordinator for the Eagles. So he's worked with Sirianni with the Colts, where he was the wide receiver coach. He joined the Eagles when Sirianni got the job as the pass game coordinator. Now he's the pass game coordinator, associate head coach. I think all signs point to him being the next offensive coordinator. Uh, Listen, I mean, anytime that you have one of these things happen, the one thing why they like Kellen Moore is he had called plays for a long time. And the other thing is he had called plays for a long time in the division. Now the division changed, but when Dan Quinn went to the Cowboys, like, well, think who Kellen Moore was up against in practice. So he's used to them, the Giants personnel. He's very comfortable with that. And anytime you go with a first time play caller, remember the Eagles did it with Brian Johnson. Now, granted, I think Brian Johnson had called plays in college for Utah, but it was a first time play caller in the NFL. It's just risk. But if you make that move, I would imagine that you're comfortable with his relationship with your quarterback, with the personnel, with Howie. The owner likes you. So I think that all factors in. But, by all accounts, it looks like it's going to be him. Bears fan, we'll end on this. This offseason, whether it be free agency or the draft, we're looking for bolstering both sides of the line of scrimmage. One name that's been out there in terms of free agency is Trey Smith. I've had my eye on Trey Smith since he was a rookie and noticed he's one of the few linemen in the NFL that is an absolute uh, mastodon that plays with violence the way Trent Williams plays. My only concern is he's now going to play in his third straight Super Bowl. Does that factor in that he's played 3 extended seasons consecutively cause any concern if you were going to sign him? He was a player that came up last night as well. By all accounts, people think that I asked, like, could he get $70 million on the open market? Like, could he get a 4-year, $100 million contract with 60 to 70 guaranteed? A lot of people thought that, his number is going to be over $20 million a year. So no, it's not going to, as long as he does not get injured in the Super Bowl, he is going to break the bank this offseason. And I think it's going to be difficult for the Chiefs to keep him. And they love him. They don't like him, they love him. But it gets expensive. I mean, they want to keep him, but all of a sudden he hits free agency. I mean, a lot of people think the Bears, Ryan Poles, knows him. Uh, it's expensive. I mean, the Chiefs tried to sign him last year, and he said no because team friendly deal. I think I'm going to get paid, and he ain't wrong. So I think the Bears, but they're going to have competition. I mean, there are a lot of teams. Look at Washington. Like, they got a lot of money. They could use some players. Look at Minnesota. They got a lot of money. They could use some offensive linemen. Look at the Patriots. They got a lot of money. They could use some offensive linemen. His market, people thought it was nuts when I said, like, I think could he get $80 million guaranteed? It's like, oh, no. I'm like, there is so much money out there, and it's just going to be a bidding process. Like, how do some of these houses, like, oh, went on the market for $1 million, they ended up getting 1, 2. Well, 3 people wanted it. They kept bidding against each other. It drove the price up. That's what happens in free agency. That's why these guys get paid so much money. It's why when players take early deals with teams, they don't get as much because there's no one bidding for their services beside the team. Well, think who's bidding on you when I mean, he's going to be one of the best free agents at a position where teams are desperate for offensive linemen. It's like, well, he's one of the best offensive linemen for the best team in the league, who's a high character, like you said, badass. It's like, wait, he's a starter on a dynasty whose character is elite, whose play style is violent and aggressive, and he's blocked for one of the great players in league history. I mean, I I think he's going to be one of the top free agents for a lot of teams that have money because any team could use a guy like Trey Smith. And like you said, the Bears, I would imagine he might be their number one target. But are they willing to break the bank for him? I would imagine Ben Johnson, who just came from the Lions, where offensive line was pretty freaking good and was a huge reason they were so good, is going to be all over this guy. So, yeah, Trey Smith Bears. I think a lot of people are going to start circling that, but they're going to have a lot of competition for his services. Appreciate everyone listening. We'll be back in Scottsdale tomorrow night, and we'll record a little open for the podcast I did with Stuckey, and we will talk soon. Adios.